So, I hope everyone's having a decent day so far, apart from some people watching the stream for apparently about 15 minutes where I was just completely unaware that I was currently live on camera. Many apologies. Alright, so today's going to be a really quick one because I want to give you guys time to continue your work. So, while I get things started, if anybody did have a question about the assignment or the projecty part that we started yesterday, please go ahead and enter it, and I'll get around to answering it as soon as I'm done with this. So, I also put a video. It has nothing to do with what we're currently working with, but it's an interesting comparison between the COVID 19 epidemic, or pandemic, excuse me, and the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic. And it's a long video. I think it's about 16, 17 minutes, something like that. It's in the folder for today. Feel free to take a look at it if you're interested. They do a nice job of kind of lining up what it was then, what it is now, and how these two things can be compared to one another. It's an issue of comparing things like how quickly does it spread, the lethality of it, a lot of different aspects. Not to mention also some of the socioeconomic impacts and the effects at each time that could make one more dangerous than the other one. For instance, were avian flu, Spanish flu, whatever you want to call it, to become another pandemic now, it might not be as deadly as it was turn of the century. So, anyway, feel free to check that out if you're interested. Otherwise, I haven't seen any questions, so we'll just get rolling into the next layer that I am adding to this wonderful onion of a evolution project. So what we're going to be doing now, and these are the directions that are also in Schoology, is we're going to now take the clade that you made yesterday with your 5 different organisms, your beginning ancient ancestor, your modern day descendant, and then the additional 3 transitions in between. And now what I'm going to ask you to do is you are going to identify 3 places along that timeline that a speciation event happened. Now, all of these branching species were not ultimately successful in meeting the needs in order to stick around. They're all dead. They're all extinct now. So you're not going to need to continue them on past this. But I want you to include the branch for where they come out in that clade. I want you to identify what kind of isolation mechanism was experienced by the population then. And once again, please be specific. Explain what you mean. Don't just say behavioral isolation. Please explain to me what that behavioral isolation was. Be as specific as you can. Make it up. Remember, this is all fictional, so, you know, your imagination is the limit. Feel free to have a little bit of fun with it. But then, I also want you to tell me what form of natural selection did the species experience then? Was it directional? Was it stabilizing? Was it disruptive? Go back and review your notes if you're not sure what each of those are. And once again, explain to me then what it was doing with the traits. How was that affecting the phenotype of the population as it started to branch out and speciate away from whatever the ancestor form was? And then I'm going to ask you guys to do 2 more additional bits for just one of these 3 branch species, just one of them. You don't need to do one for each, just one of them. I want you to give me an example of a convergent evolution trait that it has with one of the 5 main clade species that you worked on yesterday, the backbone of the project. So one of them, pick some trait and give me the example of a convergent evolution between this extinct branching species and the primary clade species. And then for a branch, it could be the same branch. So if you want to do both of these with the same one, sure, go for it. Then I want you to explain what kind of post-zygotic barrier did the branching species have that stopped it from hybridizing with that original population when their two areas overlapped again. That doesn't need to be right away. If they suffered some form of geographic isolation due to tectonic movements of the Earth, it might be a million years until the two populations can once again overlap. But once they can, I want to know what form of post-zygotic barrier was it, just for one of them. You don't have to do this for all three of the branching species, just one of them. So at the end of today, the project that you have should be your original cladogram of the 5 species, from the ancient ancestor up through to the modern day survivor, with the 3 different transitions in between. Remember, shared characteristics both down to the earlier and continued on to the later. Also, what their one shared trait is through all 5 species. The one very specific thing that did not change. I gave you an example yesterday. If you don't remember what it is, check the YouTube channel for what I talked about. And then you should have 3 branches coming off of your original clade, each one for a different evolutionary dead end. A species that started to differentiate, was successful for a time, but ultimately not in the grand scheme of life. And then from those 3 branches, I need to know what form of speciation, what form of isolation it was that formed the split, and then also what form of natural selection did they experience. And then finally, one of those 3 branches, needs to be an example of convergent evolution with your main clade line. And another branch, or the same branch, doesn't matter to me, you need to explain what the post-zygotic barrier is that stopped hybridization once the 2 populations could overlap again. Check your notes if you're not sure what that is. Alright, so, as an example, one moment. So, let's imagine that these pennies represent your original 5 species. And let me get rid of that window. Alright? Now, these represent the original 5. You can imagine a line coming up through and connecting them. This is your ancestor, the most ancient one. It had 3 characteristics that carried on to this one. This transitional had 3 characteristics that matched this one, but also passed 3 on to here, and etc., etc. And all of these are connected by one specific shared characteristic. That was yesterday. Now what I want you to do is to go, okay, well, we also have these 3 nickels. Now, these are extinct species. One of them branches off here, another one branches off here, and the last one, maybe you could put it off this one, maybe it's somewhere in the middle, maybe it came off of one of these. I really don't care how you do it. We're just going to muddy the waters a little bit and make them more accurate. You don't need to show it in the diagram. You can just make little notes. You can just kind of write it down. Next to it, what goes up, what goes down. All right, so let's say that you set up, right? And here are each of our new 3 branches. They didn't reach modern day like this one did. They went extinct. So now, at this point, we want to include a paragraph. You don't need it on this page. It can be on a separate page that says what isolation mechanism happened here to allow this split to happen. What form of natural selection was influencing this species, or maybe both of them, in order to further guide them in their differentiation. Everybody on point so far? Now, the tricky part is for one of these, we want to we want them to demonstrate convergent evolution, which is where we see a similar trait evolve despite not directly being a relative of. In the cladogram that we did, the lab, you guys saw that with the tuna fish. It had this dorsal fin. The dorsal fin was not part of anything else. And the only other thing that had a dorsal fin were like the sharks and the whales at the very end of that evolutionary pathway. So that was convergent. So maybe I decide this one is going to be my example of convergent evolution. And I decide to give this one a trait that this species had from your original one. It's not one that should have been here this early. It evolved on its own, but it's convergent, so it's just similar to. And then we also want to make sure that we go through and we point out a post-zygotic barrier on one of these. And so now I may decide this one. And I'll say that this one reconnected with the parent population, but thanks to blank, they were not able to interbreed. And then you want to describe which one of the three post-zygotic barriers it was that got in the way. Check your notes. All right. Does that make it more clear? All right. And are there any questions that people still have in regards to this one? Tomorrow? Yes. You only need one example of convergent evolution and one example of a post-zygotic barrier. If you want to do more, do more. I will never criticize people for doing more. And then tomorrow, I will add in the last layer of this project, and then you guys will have a day or two to get it done while we start to do a little bit of other review. Any final questions? This has been a real... Wow, okay, I take it back. We've still been about 15 minutes on here. Anything else that you guys want me to go over, or anything else that I can answer for you? All right. Then in which case, I'm going to stop recording, and then I want to ask you guys a question.